The old Victorian house loomed against the darkening sky, its windows like hollow eyes staring down at Sarah Morgan as she clutched her camera with trembling hands. For weeks, neighbors had reported seeing a small golden retriever puppy darting in and out of the crumbling structure, but every rescue attempt had failed. The mystery wasn't just why the puppy refused to leave. It was the haunting sound of a child's laughter that seemed to follow the golden fur whenever it disappeared into the shadows. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusting her volunteer badge from the local animal rescue. This was supposed to be a routine call, but something about this case had captured the attention of the entire town. Each time anyone approached the house, the puppy would appear briefly at a window or doorway, watching with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold a secret, before vanishing back into the depths of the abandoned mansion. The autumn wind whispered through dying leaves, carrying with it the musty scent of decay and forgotten memories. The house had stood empty for nearly a decade, ever since the Morrison family's tragic accident. Local children whispered stories about ghosts, but Sarah knew better, or at least she thought she did. Until now, she had always believed that every animal rescue had a logical explanation. But as she stood before the rusted iron gates, watching the puppy materialize on the overgrown front porch like a golden spirit, she wasn't so sure anymore. "Hey there, little one," she called softly, taking a cautious step forward. The puppy's ears perked up, and for a moment their eyes met. Sarah's heart clenched at the intelligence and what seemed like sadness in those deep brown eyes. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the puppy turned and disappeared through the partially open front door, leaving only the echo of its tags jingling in the growing darkness. Sarah checked her phone. Multiple missed calls from the shelter. Director demanding updates. The community had become invested in this mystery, with social media buzzing about the guardian puppy of Morrison House. Some claimed the puppy was protecting something valuable. Others insisted it was waiting for owners who would never return. But none of them knew what Sarah had discovered in her research about the house's history, a detail that made her blood run cold every time she thought about it. The wooden steps creaked under her feet as she approached the entrance. The last rays of sunlight filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. The air inside was thick with the weight of untold stories, and Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the gloom like a knife. Cobwebs decorated every corner, and the wallpaper peeled from the walls in long, mournful strips. "I know you're here," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know why you're protecting this place. I understand now." A soft whimper echoed from somewhere upstairs, followed by the distinct sound of paws on old wood. Sarah's hand tightened around her flashlight as she began to climb the grand staircase, each step releasing a cloud of dust into the air. The puppy's behavior had baffled everyone. It wasn't aggressive, wasn't feral, but refused to be caught or coaxed away from the house. It would accept food left on the porch, somehow managing to eat it without ever being caught, but would vanish like smoke whenever anyone got too close. The second floor was a maze of closed doors and empty rooms, their contents long since cleared out. But one door at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar, and as Sarah approached, she heard it again. The sound of a child's laughter, so faint it might have been imagination. The puppy sat in the doorway, watching her with those knowing eyes, its golden fur catching the last light of day, streaming through a broken window. This time, it didn't run. Instead, it turned its head toward the room beyond, as if inviting her to follow. Sarah's fingers found the old brass doorknob, cool to the touch. As she pushed the door open wider, her flashlight revealed what looked like a child's bedroom, preserved like a time capsule, while the rest of the house had been emptied. Dusty toys still lined the shelves, and a small bed sat in the corner, its covers undisturbed. The puppy padded over to the bed and sat beside it, looking up at something Sarah couldn't see. But as she moved closer, her flashlight beam caught something that made her gasp. A photograph tucked into the frame of a shattered mirror. In it, a young girl smiled broadly, her arms wrapped around a golden retriever puppy that could have been a twin to the one sitting before her now. But it was the date stamped in the corner that made Sarah's hands shake. 3 days before the Morrison family's accident. The puppy in the photograph wore the same distinctive heart-shaped tag that glinted on the neck of the one watching her now, impossible as that seemed. As Sarah's flashlight beam trembled across the room, more photos emerged from the shadows, telling a story that defied explanation. The mystery of the puppy who refused to leave was about to unravel, and Sarah realized she was standing on the edge of something that would change not just her life, but the way everyone in town thought about loyalty, love, and the bonds that transcend time itself. Because sometimes the most extraordinary acts of devotion come from the most unexpected sources, and the truest forms of love know no boundaries, not even those between life and death. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the photograph, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. The puppy, now sitting patiently by the bed, watched her with eyes that seemed to hold decades of secrets. The similarities were impossible to ignore, from the unique golden fur pattern to the heart-shaped tag that caught the beam of her flashlight. Moving closer to the bed, Sarah discovered a dusty journal wedged between the mattress and the wall. The name Emily Morrison was written in childish handwriting on the cover, decorated with stickers and doodles of puppies. The puppy's tail thumped gently against the wooden floor as Sarah opened the journal, releasing the scent of forgotten memories into the musty air. "Dear Diary," Sarah read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "Today is the best day ever. Mom and Dad finally said yes to keeping promise. That's what I named him, because he promised to be my best friend forever when our eyes first met at the shelter." The puppy, Promise, edged closer, resting his head on Sarah's knee as she continued reading. The journal entries painted a picture of a happy 8-year-old girl and her beloved puppy, sharing secret adventures and precious moments in this very room. But as Sarah turned the pages, her heart grew heavier. The final entry was dated October 15th, 2013, the day before the accident that claimed the Morrison family. "Something's wrong with Promise," the last entry read. "He won't stop barking at Dad's car. He's never done that before. Dad says he's just being silly. But Promise isn't silly. He's the smartest puppy in the world. He's trying to tell us something important. I know it." Sarah's throat tightened as she remembered the newspaper article she'd researched. The Morrison family had died in a car accident when their brakes failed on Mountain Pass Road. The articles mentioned a puppy had been in the car too, but its body was never found. Some locals claimed to have seen a golden retriever puppy running through the woods toward town that night, but no one ever caught it. A soft whine drew Sarah's attention back to the present. Promise was now standing by the window, his outline silhouetted against the deepening twilight. As Sarah watched, he pressed his nose against the glass, fogging it with his breath. When he pulled back, Sarah gasped. There in the condensation for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw the reflection of a young girl standing beside him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly, and Sarah's flashlight flickered. Promise turned to look at her, and in that moment she understood. He wasn't just any puppy. He was Emily's Promise, somehow unchanged by the passage of time, keeping his eternal promise to be her best friend forever. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from the shelter director. "Any progress? The media's getting interested in this story. We need to get that puppy out of there before something happens to it." But Sarah knew now that this wasn't a simple rescue case. Promise wasn't trapped here. He was choosing to stay, fulfilling a commitment that transcended ordinary understanding. The real question was, what should she do with this knowledge? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As if reading her thoughts, Promise padded over to Emily's desk and nosed at something beneath it. Sarah knelt down, discovering a small wooden box pushed far back against the wall. Inside, she found more photographs, letters, and a small notebook filled with Emily's plans for Promise's training. But it was the letter on top that caught her attention, addressed to "Whoever finds Promise." "If you're reading this," the letter began in Emily's careful handwriting, "it means you've discovered our secret. Promise is special. He's not just a puppy. He's a guardian, a protector, and the best friend anyone could ask for. He knew something, was wrong that day, tried to warn us, but we didn't listen. Now he stays here, watching over our memories, keeping his promise to never leave me." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she read the letter. The story was beginning to piece itself together, a tale of loyalty so powerful it defied the laws of nature itself. But there was more to the letter, a request that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "Promise needs someone to understand," Emily's letter continued. "Someone who knows that love doesn't always make sense, that some bonds can't be explained. He's been alone for so long, keeping his promise to me, but maybe, just maybe, it's time for him to make new promises too." A warm weight pressed against Sarah's side as Promise leaned against her, his eyes fixed on the letter in her hands. For the first time since she'd entered the house, he didn't seem sad or distant. Instead, there was a question in his gaze, a glimmer of possibility. The wind outside had picked up, making the old house creak and groan. Shadows danced across the walls as tree branches swayed before the windows, but Sarah no longer felt afraid. There was something peaceful about this room now, as if Emily's presence lingered in every cherished object, every faded photograph. Promise got up and walked to the bedroom door, then looked back at Sarah expectantly. He led her through the house, past empty rooms and down creaking stairs, until they reached the kitchen. There, in a corner, was a small door leading to what must have been a pantry. Promise scratched at it gently, and Sarah opened it to find a collection of Emily's treasures, Promise's original leash and collar, his favorite toys, and a small photo album dedicated entirely to their time together. As Sarah leafed through the album, she began to understand the depth of Emily's love for Promise, and his for her. There were pictures of them playing in the backyard, Promise wearing ridiculous costumes Emily had made for him, the two of them curled up reading together. In every photo, the bond between them was palpable. The last photo in the album showed Emily and Promise sitting on the front porch, both looking at the camera with identical expressions of pure joy. On the back, Emily had written, "Promise and me, forever and always. Some promises are meant to be kept, no matter what." Sarah sat on the dusty kitchen floor, the album in her lap, as Promise rested his head on her knee again. The weight of the decision before her felt enormous. The shelter wanted to rescue Promise, but he wasn't a regular puppy who needed saving. He was a guardian, a keeper of memories, a living embodiment of a love so pure it had survived death itself. But as she looked into his eyes, Sarah saw something else too, a tiredness, a longing for connection that went beyond his duty to Emily. Perhaps, she thought, the greatest act of love isn't just keeping promises, but knowing when it's time to make new ones. Sarah pulled out her phone and began to type a message to the shelter director, but stopped. This wasn't a story that could be told in a text message or explained in a report. This was something that needed to be understood with the heart, not the head. Promise watched her intently, his tail giving a tentative wag. In the growing darkness of the kitchen, with Emily's treasures spread around them, Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives forever. But first, she had to help the world understand why a puppy's refusal to leave an abandoned house wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a lesson in love, loyalty, and the promises we keep, even when the rest of the world has forgotten them. The next step would require courage, compassion, and faith in things that couldn't be explained. But as Promise pressed closer to her side, Sarah knew that some stories weren't meant to end with a rescue. They were meant to begin with one. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the Morrison house, casting long shadows across the floor where Sarah had spent the night. She hadn't planned to stay, but after everything she'd discovered, leaving Promise alone again felt impossible. The puppy lay curled beside her, his golden fur catching the early light, making him look almost ethereal. Sarah's phone had dozens of missed calls and messages from the shelter, but she ignored them for now. Instead, she pulled out her camera and began documenting everything. The photographs, Emily's journal, the treasures in the pantry. Each click of the shutter preserved another piece of this extraordinary story, building evidence of something that defied explanation. As she photographed Promise's heart-shaped tag, catching the way it sparkled in the morning light, she noticed something she'd missed before. Engraved on the back, in tiny letters nearly worn smooth by time, was a message. "Love transcends all boundaries. Emily." The simplicity of those words, chosen by a child who understood love in its purest form, brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. Promise stood and stretched, shaking off the night's stillness. He seemed different this morning, lighter somehow, as if sharing his secret had lifted a weight from his small shoulders. He trotted to the front door and looked back at Sarah, tail wagging with newfound energy. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Early morning joggers slowed their pace as they passed the old house, trying to catch a glimpse of the mysterious puppy that had captured the town's imagination. Sarah watched as Promise moved confidently across the overgrown lawn, no longer hiding from curious onlookers. A small crowd began to gather at the gate, phones raised to capture photos of the elusive puppy. Among them was Mrs. Chen from the local newspaper, who had been following the story since it first broke. Her eyes widened when she saw Sarah emerge from the house. "You stayed the night?" Mrs. Chen called out, notebook already in hand. "Did you discover why the puppy won't leave?" Sarah looked at Promise, who sat calmly beside her, showing no sign of his usual skittishness around strangers. "Yes," she said finally, "but it's not the story everyone thinks it is. This isn't about a puppy that needs to be rescued. It's about a promise that needs to be honored." Over the next hour, Sarah shared Emily's story with Mrs. Chen, showing her the photographs and journal entries. The reporter's initial skepticism faded as the evidence mounted, replaced by a growing sense of wonder. Promise remained by Sarah's side throughout, occasionally pressing his nose against the old photographs as if to confirm their authenticity. "But how is it possible?" Mrs. Chen whispered, staring at Promise's unchanged appearance in photos taken a decade apart. "He hasn't aged a day." "Some things can't be explained," Sarah replied, running her hand through Promise's fur. "But that doesn't make them any less real." As word spread through the town, more people began arriving at the Morrison house. Instead of hiding, Promise greeted each visitor with gentle curiosity, as if he knew it was finally time to share his story with the world. Children pressed against the gate, pointing and whispering, their eyes wide with wonder. Sarah noticed one little girl in particular, standing slightly apart from the others. She held a worn stuffed animal and watched Promise with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. When Promise approached her, tail wagging softly, the girl reached through the gate to touch his nose. "He's not sad anymore," the girl announced with the certainty only a child could possess. "He was waiting for someone to understand." The girl's mother approached, apologetic. "I'm sorry, Emma has a vivid imagination. She's been talking about this puppy for weeks, insisting he was protecting something special." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. "You're right," she said softly. "He was protecting something very special, a promise of love that never ended." As the morning wore on, more of Emily's former neighbors and classmates arrived, bringing with them their own memories of the Morrison family. Old photographs were shared, stories exchanged, and gradually the true impact of Promise's dedication began to emerge. Mrs. Peterson, who had lived next door to the Morrisons, revealed that she had seen Promise the night of the accident. "He was trying so hard to stop them from leaving," she recalled, her voice thick with emotion, barking, pulling at Emily's sleeve. "We all thought he was just being difficult. If only we had paid attention." Promise pressed against Mrs. Peterson's leg as she spoke, offering comfort for a guilt long carried. The old woman knelt with difficulty, wrapping her arms around him as tears fell freely. "You did everything you could," she whispered to him. "Emily would be so proud of how you've kept your promise." Sarah watched these interactions with growing clarity. Promise hadn't just been guarding a house, he had been preserving the memory of a love that deserved to be remembered. His presence had kept Emily's story alive, waiting for the right moment to share it with the world. The shelter director arrived mid-morning, ready to argue about the need to remove Promise from the property. But as Sarah showed her the evidence, they'd gathered and introduced her to the growing community of supporters. Her perspective began to shift. "This isn't just about animal welfare anymore," the director admitted, watching Promise play gently with a group of children through the gate. "This is about something much bigger, something that could change how we think about the bonds between humans and animals." Sarah nodded, an idea forming in her mind. "What if we turned this into something positive? Instead of trying to rescue Promise, what if we helped him continue his mission in a new way?" The crowd grew quiet as Sarah outlined her proposal. The Morrison house, rather than remaining a deteriorating reminder of tragedy, could be transformed into something meaningful, a sanctuary for animals waiting to find their own special bonds, inspired by the extraordinary love between a girl and her puppy. Promise sat at attention as Sarah spoke, his eyes bright with what looked remarkably like approval. When she finished, he stood and walked to the front door of the house, then back to Sarah, as if giving his blessing to the idea of sharing his space with others in need. The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Contractors offered their services to restore the house. Local businesses pledged support for the future sanctuary. Children started planning fundraisers at their schools. Even Mrs. Chen promised to use her platform at the newspaper to help spread the word. As the excitement built around them, Sarah felt Promise lean against her leg, his warm presence a reminder of why this all mattered. She knelt beside him, running her fingers through his soft fur. "You've done such a good job keeping your promise." To Emily, she whispered, "Now it's time to let us help you make it even more meaningful." Promise's tail wagged gently, and for a moment Sarah could have sworn she saw the faint outline of a young girl standing behind him, her smile as bright as the morning sun. Then it was gone, but the feeling of blessing remained. The transformation was beginning, not just of an old house but of hearts and minds. Promise's unwavering loyalty was about to inspire a new generation to believe in the power of love, the importance of keeping promises, and the magic that happens when we open our hearts to things we can't explain. As the morning turned to afternoon, Sarah sat on the front porch with Promise, watching the community come together in ways she never could have imagined. Sometimes, she realized, the most powerful changes begin with a simple act of understanding, and a puppy who refused to break a promise. The transformation of the Morrison house began with the rising sun the next day. Local contractors arrived early, their trucks lining the quiet street as they assessed the work ahead. Promise watched from his favorite spot on the porch, his tail wagging gently as workers carried in equipment and supplies. Sarah sat beside him, amazed at how quickly their community had mobilized. Marcus Chen, a retired architect and Mrs. Chen's husband, had stayed up all night drawing plans for the renovation. He spread them out on a folding table in the front yard, explaining his vision to the gathering crowd. "We'll preserve Emily's room exactly as it is," he said, pointing to the blueprints. "It'll become the heart of the sanctuary, a reminder of why we're doing this." The house hummed with activity as volunteers cleared away years of dust and debris. Promise moved from room to room, supervising the work with surprising authority. When someone suggested removing the old wallpaper in the hallway, he barked sharply until Sarah came to investigate. Under the peeling paper, they discovered Emily's height measurements, marked with dates and decorated with little drawings. "Leave it," Sarah decided immediately. "We'll frame it, protect it. Everything here tells part of the story." Emma, the perceptive little girl from the day before, had returned with her entire class. Their teacher, Miss Reynolds, had turned Promise's story into a lesson about compassion and dedication. The children worked in the overgrown garden, clearing weeds and planting flowers donated by the local nursery. "Promise needs a beautiful view," Emma declared, carefully arranging yellow daisies, Emily's favorites, according to her journal, along the front path. "And the other animals will want pretty flowers too." As the morning progressed, more of the town's hidden connections to the Morrison family emerged. The baker brought old photos of Emily's 8th birthday party, celebrated in his shop. The Sartre librarian arrived with a stack of books Emily had loved, each one still bearing her careful signature on the checkout cards. She always said promise helped her read, the librarian remembered, smiling as the puppy nosed through the familiar volumes. She'd say he was the best listener in the world. Sarah was documenting everything, her camera capturing the gradual rebirth of the old house. She photographed Promise as he guided workers through the rooms, somehow knowing exactly which original features needed to be preserved. The puppy seemed to glow with renewed purpose, his eyes bright with an energy that made him appear ageless. Around noon, a sleek car pulled up to the gate. A well-dressed woman stepped out, her presence causing a stir among the volunteers. It was Catherine Walsh, CEO of the largest pet food company in the state. She had read Mrs. Chen's article and driven 3 hours to see Promise for herself. "My daughter was Emily's best friend," she revealed, kneeling to greet Promise, who approached her with immediate recognition. "They used to have sleepovers here." Promise would curl up between their sleeping bags, guarding them both. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she surveyed the ongoing work. "I've been looking for a way to honor Emily's memory. When I read about Promise keeping his vigil all these years, well, this sanctuary needs to happen. Whatever you need, funding, supplies, ongoing support, consider it done." The announcement energized the volunteers even further. Plans expanded. State-of-the-art medical facilities for rescued animals, education programs for children, training spaces for therapy dogs. Catherine's company would ensure the sanctuary's long-term sustainability while keeping it true to its origins, as a place of unconditional love and unwavering loyalty. As workers began reinforcing the house's foundation, they discovered something remarkable. Beneath the porch steps, carefully wrapped in waterproof material, was a time capsule. The date on it matched Emily's last journal entry. Promise watched intently as Sarah carefully opened it. Inside, they found a letter from Emily, written the night before the accident. "Dear Future," it began. "If you're reading this, I hope Promise is with you. He's more than just a puppy. He's magic. Mom says I'm silly for saying that, but I know it's true. He understands things that nobody else does. He tried to tell us something was wrong with the car today, but grown-ups don't always listen to puppies or kids." Sarah had to pause reading, as emotion overcame her. Promise pressed against her leg, offering comfort as he had done for Emily so long ago. The letter continued. "If something ever happens to me, Promise will need someone special to understand him. He promised to be my best friend forever, and he never breaks his promises. But maybe forever doesn't have to mean being alone. Maybe it just means keeping love alive in new ways." The wisdom of a child, written hours before tragedy struck, seemed to echo through the years. Promise's dedication hadn't just been about guarding an empty house. It had been about keeping Emily's understanding of love and loyalty alive until the world was ready to learn from it. The sanctuary's mission crystallized in that moment. It would be more than just a shelter for animals in need. It would be a place where Promise's example taught people about the depth of bonds between humans and animals, about promises worth keeping, and about love that transcends ordinary understanding. As evening approached, Sarah sat with Promise on the newly reinforced porch steps. The house behind them was already transforming, its windows cleaned and glowing with fresh light. Children's laughter rang from the garden, where Emma and her classmates were installing solar lights along the paths. "You've started something extraordinary," Sarah told Promise, scratching behind his ears. "Emily would be so proud of how you've turned your promise to her into hope for others." Promise's tail thumped against the wood, and his eyes held a contentment that seemed new. The weight of his solitary vigil was lifting, replaced by the joy of sharing Emily's legacy with a world ready to embrace it. Mrs. Peterson emerged from the house, carrying Emily's journal. "I found the perfect place for this," she said, showing them the display case she'd brought, museum quality, UV protected. "Emily's words need to be preserved. They're going to help so many people understand." As twilight settled over the property, the volunteers began heading home, promising to return the next day. Promise stood at the gate, accepting pets and thanks from each person who had helped. He no longer needed to hide in shadows or guard his secret alone. His story was becoming a beacon of hope, inspiring others to believe in the extraordinary power of love and the promises we make to those we cherish. Sarah watched as Promise made one final circuit of the property before settling into his favorite spot by Emily's window. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to transform loss into legacy. But tonight, in the quiet of the gathering dark, she could almost hear Emily's laughter on the evening breeze, not sad now, but joyful, as if celebrating the way her puppy's faithfulness had sparked a movement of compassion and understanding that would touch countless lives. The Morrison house, once a symbol of tragedy, was becoming a testament to the way love can bridge any distance, heal any wound, and inspire any heart willing to believe in magic that wags its tail. The first rays of dawn painted the Morrison house in shades of gold and rose, catching the fresh paint and restored woodwork that had transformed the once decrepit structure. 3 weeks had passed since the renovation began, and the change was remarkable. But even more remarkable was the change in Promise, who now bounded through the halls with renewed vigor, his mission evolving from solitary guardian to inspiring teacher. Today marked a special milestone, the arrival of their first rescue. Sarah stood at the front gate, Promise sitting alertly beside her as a volunteer's car pulled up. In the back seat, a trembling German shepherd puppy peered out, its eyes wide with fear. The local police had found him abandoned at a gas station, too traumatized to let anyone near him. "This is Hope," the volunteer explained, carefully opening the car door. "We've tried everything, but he won't trust anyone. We thought maybe Promise could help." Promise's ears perked up at the mention of his name. Without waiting for instruction, he trotted to the car, his demeanor gentle and assured. Hope cowered at first, but something in Promise's presence seemed to calm him. The German shepherd's tail gave a tentative wag. Sarah watched in amazement as Promise led Hope up the front path, showing him around with the confidence of a seasoned guide. When they reached Emily's room, now preserved behind glass walls as the sanctuary's heart, Promise sat, letting Hope take in the photographs and mementos that told the story of unbreakable bonds. Emma, who had become a regular volunteer, despite her young age, arrived for her daily visit. "Promise is teaching him," she whispered to Sarah, watching the two dogs interact. "He's showing Hope that being scared doesn't last forever." The transformation over the next few hours was extraordinary. Hope, who had refused food from humans for days, accepted treats from Emma's hand while Promise sat nearby, offering silent encouragement. By afternoon, the German shepherd was exploring the garden, his fear gradually giving way to curiosity. Catherine Walsh arrived with more good news. Her company's foundation had approved funding for an expansion, a new wing, dedicated to rehabilitating traumatized animals. Promise's story has touched so many hearts, she explained. People want to be part of this. The sanctuary was becoming something none of them had initially imagined. Promise's unwavering dedication to Emily had sparked a movement, drawing people who believed in the healing power of unconditional love. Each day brought new volunteers, new stories, new opportunities to transform lives. Mrs. Chen's latest article had gone viral, bringing visitors from across the country. They came to see the puppy who had kept his promise for a decade, but they left with a deeper understanding of loyalty, resilience, and the bonds that connect all living beings. As Sarah updated the sanctuary's journal, inspired by Emily's own detailed recordings, she noticed Promise leading Hope to a special corner of the garden. There, Emma and her classmates had created a memory wall, covering it with photographs of beloved pets who had changed their owners' lives. "See," Emma told Hope, who listened with perked ears. "Everyone here has a story. Promises is just the beginning." The afternoon brought another surprise. A famous animal behaviorist, Dr. James Morrison, no relation to Emily's family, arrived unannounced. He had been skeptical of Promise's story, believing there must be a logical explanation for the puppy's ageless appearance and extraordinary behavior. Promise greeted him with his usual gentle dignity, those knowing eyes meeting the scientist's skeptical gaze. Dr. Morrison knelt, examining the heart-shaped tag, the distinctive markings that matched decade-old photographs. "In 30 years of studying animal behavior, I've never seen anything like this," he admitted. "But maybe that's the point. Some things aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be believed." The scientist's endorsement added credibility to their work, but Sarah knew the real magic happened in smaller moments, like when Hope, following Promise's example, helped calm a newly arrived rescue cat, or when Promise seemed to know exactly which children visiting the sanctuary needed special attention, leading them to Emily's room, where her story helped them understand their own struggles with loss and change. As evening approached, Sarah found Promise in his favorite spot by Emily's window. Hope lay nearby, finally peaceful, while Emma read aloud from Emily's journal. The setting sun cast long shadows through the restored glass, and for a moment Sarah caught a glimpse of something extraordinary. Promise's shadow seemed to merge with the faint outline of a young girl, their silhouettes blending in a dance of light and memory. "Love doesn't end," Emma said suddenly, looking up from the journal. "It just changes shape, like Promise did." He turned his love for Emily into love for everyone who needs it. The wisdom of children, Sarah had learned, often came closest to explaining the inexplicable. Promise's dedication to Emily hadn't trapped him in the past. It had given him the strength to build a future where her understanding of love could help heal other broken hearts. Later that night, as the sanctuary settled into peaceful quiet, Sarah watched Promise make his rounds. He checked on Hope, nosed through the garden where new flowers were blooming, and paused by the memory wall where Emily's story had inspired so many others. The Morrison house, once a place of sadness, now pulsed with life and purpose. Every rescued animal, every transformed life, every moment of healing was a testament to the power of a promise, kept not just with dedication, but with love that grew large enough to encompass an entire community. As Promise returned to Sarah's side, his ageless eyes bright with contentment, she understood that some promises weren't meant to end. They were meant to evolve, to grow, to inspire others to believe in the extraordinary capacity of love to bridge all boundaries, heal all wounds, and light the way forward for hearts brave enough to follow. The sanctuary was more than a memorial to Emily's love for Promise. It was a living testament to the way that love, when nurtured and shared, could multiply beyond imagination, touching lives in ways that defied explanation but demanded belief. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rescues, new opportunities to share the lesson Promise had taught them all, that the truest form of loyalty isn't just keeping a promise, but allowing that promise to grow into something greater than anyone could have imagined. A late autumn storm battered the sanctuary's windows, but inside, warmth and hope flourished. Promise sat beside a new arrival, a blind border collie named Luna, rescued from an abandoned farm. Unlike other newcomers who needed time to adjust, Luna had formed an immediate connection with Promise, as if she could sense the extraordinary nature of her guide. Sarah watched from the doorway of the rehabilitation room as Promise gently led Luna through a series of obstacles they'd set up. The border collie, who had initially been terrified of moving through unfamiliar spaces, followed Promise's soft barks with growing confidence. Each successful step was met with a gentle nose bump from Promise, his unique way of offering encouragement. "It's remarkable," Dr. Morrison noted, documenting Luna's progress. The behavioral scientist had extended his stay, captivated by the unique dynamic unfolding at the sanctuary. Promise seems to understand exactly what each animal needs. With Hope, he was a steady presence. With Luna, he's become a teacher. The sanctuary had grown in ways none of them had anticipated. What started as one puppy's extraordinary vigil had blossomed into a revolutionary approach to animal rehabilitation. Promise's methods, patience, understanding, and unwavering support were setting new standards in animal care. Emma burst through the front door, scattering raindrops as she shook off her umbrella. "Mrs. Peterson says there's a surprise coming," she announced breathlessly. The elderly neighbor had become the sanctuary's unofficial historian, collecting and preserving stories of lives transformed within these walls. The surprise arrived an hour later in the form of a distinguished-looking woman carrying a leather portfolio. "I'm Dr. Rebecca Hayes from the National Veterinary Association," she introduced herself, her eyes immediately drawn to Promise as he guided Luna through the room. "We've been following your work here. What you're doing. It's unprecedented." Sarah led Dr. Hayes on a tour, explaining how Promise's dedication to Emily had evolved into something greater. They passed the memory wall, now expanded to include photos and stories of animals who had found healing at the sanctuary. Hope, fully recovered from his trauma, helped run the puppy socialization program. Other success stories included rescued birds, cats, and even a rehabilitated horse who now helped with animal-assisted therapy. But the most extraordinary transformations, Sarah explained, happen in Emily's room. They entered the preserved space, where Promise now sat beside Luna, who had fallen asleep peacefully, something she hadn't done since her rescue. Dr. Hayes studied the photographs, the journal entries, the documented history of a puppy whose love transcended ordinary understanding. "We'd like to establish a research partnership," Dr. Hayes announced. not to explain promise. Some things are beyond scientific explanation, but to learn from him. His methods of animal rehabilitation, the way he connects with traumatized animals, it's revolutionary. As if understanding the magnitude of the moment, Promise left Luna's side and approached Dr. Hayes. His eyes, still holding the same wisdom that had captivated Emily years ago, met the scientist's gaze. Dr. Hayes knelt, professional detachment forgotten, as she gently touched the heart-shaped tag that had become a symbol of hope for so many. "Emily knew," Emma piped up from the doorway, where she had been listening. She wrote in her journal that promise was magic, not like fairy tales, but like love, the kind that changes everything it touches. The storm outside intensified, but within the sanctuary's walls, another kind of magic was unfolding. Dr. Hayes shared her vision of expanding the sanctuary's influence, creating training programs for veterinarians and animal behaviorists, developing new protocols based on Promise's intuitive understanding of healing. That evening, as the sanctuary staff gathered for their weekly meeting, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Promise, who usually sat beside her during these discussions, had gathered all the resident animals in the main hall. Luna, Hope, and the others formed a circle around him, as if attending their own conference. "He's teaching them," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "Teaching them how to help the new ones who'll come." The scene struck Sarah with profound understanding. Promise wasn't just sharing Emily's love. He was creating a legacy of healing that would continue through every animal touched by the sanctuary's magic. Each rescued soul who found peace here would carry forward the lesson of unconditional love and unwavering support. Catherine Walsh arrived late, bringing news that would further expand their reach. Her foundation had approved funding for satellite sanctuaries, each one built on the model Promise had inspired. "People need to see this," she said, watching the extraordinary gathering of animals. "They need to know that love like this exists." As night fell, Promise led his charges to their respective sleeping areas. Luna, now confident in navigating the halls, helped guide a newly arrived kitten. Hope stood watch over the puppy ward, his protective instinct rivaling Promise's own. Each animal had found not just healing, but purpose. Sarah found Promise in Emily's room later, his head resting on the windowsill where he had kept his decade-long vigil. But now his gaze wasn't focused on the past. He watched the storm with peaceful alertness, as if seeing beyond the darkness to the dawn that would bring new opportunities to share the love that had transformed him from a grieving puppy into a beacon of hope. "You've created something eternal," Sarah told him, sitting beside him. "Emily's love didn't end that night on Mountain Pass Road. Through you, it's touching lives she never could have imagined." Promise's tail thumped gently against the floor, and in the flash of lightning, Sarah caught another glimpse of that mysterious shadow, the outline of a young girl and her puppy, no longer separated by time, but united in a purpose that transcended ordinary understanding. The storm began to ease, and with it came the soft sound of paws on hardwood. Luna had found her way to them, followed by Hope and the others. Each animal settled around Promise, creating a living testament to the power of love to heal, transform, and inspire. Tomorrow, Sarah thought, watching this extraordinary family Promise had created, more will come, more will learn, more will believe. Because some promises, kept with pure love and unwavering faith, have the power to change not just one life, but countless others through the ripples of their endless devotion. And in that moment, as Promise sat surrounded by the lives he had helped transform, Sarah understood that Emily's puppy had kept his promise in the most beautiful way possible, by turning their love into a light that would guide lost souls home for generations to come. Winter arrived at the sanctuary, transforming the grounds into a wonderland of pristine snow. Promise's paw prints, the first to mark the fresh powder each morning, created paths that other animals instinctively followed. But today was different. The sanctuary buzzed with anticipation as they prepared for their most challenging case yet. A military veteran named James Mitchell stood at the gate, leaning heavily on his cane. Beside him, a Belgian Malinois named Atlas lay trembling, bearing both physical and emotional scars from their last deployment. The dog, once a decorated military service animal, had saved James's life in Afghanistan, but had been left traumatized by an explosion that had injured them both. "He hasn't been the same since," James explained, his voice rough with emotion. "The doctors say he's experiencing severe PTSD. He barely sleeps, doesn't trust anyone. They suggested putting him down." The former soldier's two hands shook as he gripped the leash. "This is our last hope." Promise approached the pair slowly, his demeanor showing a new kind of understanding. He didn't attempt to get close to Atlas immediately, instead sitting at a respectful distance, his calm presence offering silent support. Atlas's ears twitched, registering Promise's presence while maintaining his vigilant guard over James. Sarah noticed something remarkable. Promise was using the same careful approach she'd seen him demonstrate with Hope months ago, but with subtle differences tailored to Atlas's military background. He maintained perfect stillness, only moving when Atlas's body language showed brief moments of relaxation. Emma, who had become incredibly perceptive about Promise's methods, whispered to Sarah, "He knows Atlas is still on duty. He's showing him it's okay to stand down." Dr. Morrison, documenting the interaction, noted how Promise would occasionally glance at the sanctuary's memory wall, where Emily's story hung alongside dozens of others. It was as if he was drawing strength from all the healing that had taken place within these walls. Throughout the day, Promise orchestrated a careful dance of introduction. He brought Luna, whose blindness had taught her to trust other senses, to sit near Atlas. The Belgian Malinois' rigid posture softened slightly at Luna's peaceful presence. Then Hope joined them, his own journey from trauma to healing evident in his confident but gentle demeanor. James watched in amazement as Atlas's breathing gradually slowed, matching the calm rhythm of the sanctuary's residents. "I haven't seen him this peaceful since before." His voice trailed off, memories of that fateful day in Afghanistan still too raw. As evening approached, Promise led Atlas and James to Emily's room. The military dog's training made him naturally alert to exits and potential threats, but something about the preserved space seemed to resonate with him. Perhaps it was the pure love evident in every photograph, every journal entry, a reminder of connections that couldn't be broken by trauma or time. "Emily wrote about healing," Emma said, showing James the journal entry they'd framed above Promise's favorite window spot. "She said love is like a shield that protects you even when the world feels scary. Atlas protected you because he loves you. Now he needs to know it's okay to let love protect him too." The wisdom in those words brought tears to the hardened soldier's eyes. Atlas, sensing his handler's emotion, pressed against James's leg. The first voluntary contact he'd initiated since their injury. Promise watched this breakthrough with what could only be described as satisfaction. Sarah introduced James to their evening ritual, a gathering where sanctuary residents and their humans shared stories of progress and hope. Atlas remained, alert, but allowed other animals to settle nearby, following Promise's example of calm acceptance. Dr. Hayes, who had returned to document Atlas's case, observed the subtle ways Promise was helping the military dog rediscover trust. "He's not just showing Atlas how to feel safe," she noted. "He's teaching him how to be both protector and protected, something many service animals struggle with after trauma." That night, when most of the sanctuary had settled into sleep, Promise led Atlas to a special corner of the garden. There, under starlight filtered through snow-laden branches, sat a small memorial dedicated to service animals who had given their lives in the line of duty. Atlas's posture changed as he read the names in his own way, recognizing the honor paid to his fallen comrades. James, who had followed at a distance, watched as his faithful partner finally allowed his guard to lower. Atlas lay down in the snow, and Promise settled beside him, their breaths creating small clouds in the cold air. It was the first time since their injury that Atlas had relaxed enough to rest outside of secured military facilities. The next morning brought another milestone. As Promise made his usual rounds, Atlas followed, watching intently as the extraordinary puppy demonstrated his daily routine of care and compassion. When a new rescue arrived, a frightened beagle puppy, Atlas helped Promise create a protective circle of calm around the newcomer. "He's remembering who he was before the trauma," Dr. Morrison observed. "Promise isn't just helping him heal. He's helping him rediscover his purpose." The transformation continued over the following days. Atlas began joining Promise in the rehabilitation sessions with other animals, his military training finding new purpose in protecting and guiding those in need of healing. James, too, found purpose in sharing their story with other veterans who visited the sanctuary, seeking hope for their own service animals. Emma, ever observant, noticed how Promise would guide Atlas to Emily's room whenever the military dog's anxiety peaked. "Emily's love helps everyone," she explained to James. Promise learned that keeping her love alive means sharing it with others who need it. One snowy evening, as the sanctuary glowed with warmth and hope, Sarah found Promise and Atlas sitting together by the memory wall. The Belgian Malinois, once rigid with hypervigilance, now sat with quiet dignity, his posture reflecting not just survival, but transformation. The wall had grown, each photo and story a testament to the extraordinary healing that took place within these walls. But it was Emily's simple message that continued to guide them all. Love transcends all boundaries. Promise had proven those words true not just through his own unwavering dedication, but through his ability to help others find their way back to love and trust. As Sarah watched Atlas gently welcome another new arrival, she realized that Promise's gift wasn't just his ability to heal. It was his understanding that every broken spirit had the capacity to become a healer in their own right. Through him, Emily's love had become an endless circle of healing, each transformed heart reaching back to help another find their way home. The snow continued to fall outside, but within the sanctuary's walls, warmth and hope flourished. Promise's legacy had grown beyond anyone's imagination, touching lives in ways that proved some promises were meant not just to be kept, but to be shared, creating a tapestry of healing that would continue to grow, one heart at a time. Spring. Blossoms painted the sanctuary grounds in vibrant colors as Promise sat watching a remarkable scene unfold. A film crew from an international documentary series had arrived to capture what they called the miracle of Morrison House. But the real miracle was happening away from their cameras, in the quiet moments that defined the sanctuary's true purpose. In the garden, Atlas led a training session with newly arrived service dogs, his confidence fully restored. Luna, using her enhanced other senses, helped rehabilitate animals with visual impairments. Hope, once too traumatized to approach humans, now specialized in helping abused animals rebuild trust. Each success story bore Promise's influence, his methods of healing spreading through a growing network of transformed lives. Sarah found herself reflecting on how far they'd come as she watched a young girl named Maya approach Promise for the first time. Maya hadn't spoken since losing her parents in a car accident similar to Emily's, but something about Promise's story had drawn her to the sanctuary. "He knows about losing people too," Maya whispered, her first words in months, as Promise gently placed his head in her lap. The film crew, sensing the magnitude of the moment, kept their distance, capturing the interaction with quiet reverence. Dr. Hayes had returned with groundbreaking news. The National Veterinary Association was establishing a new field of study, based on Promise's methods, empathetic animal rehabilitation. Universities were requesting permission to send students to learn from the sanctuary's unique approach to healing. What Promise has created here goes beyond traditional animal therapy, Dr. Hayes explained to the documentary team. He's shown us that healing isn't just about treating physical wounds or behavioral issues. It's about understanding the heart of trauma and meeting it with unconditional love. The sanctuary's success had inspired similar facilities around the world. Catherine Walsh's foundation had helped establish Promise's model of care in 12 countries, each adapting his methods to their unique cultural contexts. Photos and letters from these global sanctuaries now filled a special section of the memory wall, showing how Emily's love, through Promise, had touched lives across continents. Emma, now the sanctuary's youngest certified junior trainer, led tours for visiting school groups. She had developed an uncanny ability to explain Promise's methods in ways children could understand. "Every animal here is like a different page in Emily's journal," she would tell them. "They all have stories of love that needed to be remembered and shared." That afternoon, as the documentary crew filmed Promise working with a newly arrived elephant, a retired circus performer struggling to adjust to freedom, something extraordinary happened. The massive animal, who had shown signs of severe depression, reached out with her trunk and gently touched Promise's heart-shaped tag. The gesture, caught on camera, brought tears to even the most seasoned crew members' eyes. "He speaks a language older than words," James observed, watching Promise guide the elephant through her first peaceful interaction with other animals. "It's the language Emily understood. Pure love, no conditions, no boundaries." The Sanctuary's latest initiative, developed in collaboration with Dr. Morrison, focused on pairing rehabilitated animals with children who had experienced similar traumas. Maya, working with Luna, had started helping other children find their voices. Atlas and James counseled veterans and their service animals, creating a support network that extended far beyond the sanctuary's walls. As sunset approached, Promise led his daily procession to Emily's room, The documentary crew, who had planned to film this ritual, found their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. Some things, Sarah realized, were meant to remain sacred, like the quiet moments when Promise would sit by the window, his ageless eyes reflecting the same love that had transformed a tragedy into a legacy of healing. That evening, during the sanctuary's community dinner, Promise did something unprecedented. He gathered all the resident animals, dogs, cats, horses, and even the elephant, in the main courtyard. As the humans watched in amazement, each animal seemed to take turns, sharing their own form of comfort with the others. "He's teaching them to be teachers," Emma explained, her eyes shining with understanding. "So his way of loving can keep growing, even after." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew that Promise, despite his seemingly ageless nature, had been with them for an extraordinary length of time. The documentary crew captured this gathering, understanding they were witnessing something beyond explanation. Promise's methods weren't just about healing. They were about creating a self-sustaining cycle of compassion that could continue through generations. Later that night, Sarah found a new entry in the sanctuary's journal, written in Emma's careful handwriting. Promise showed us that keeping a promise isn't just about staying faithful to one memory. It's about letting that faithfulness grow into something bigger than yourself. Emily's love didn't end when she left. It grew wings through Promise, and now it flies wherever healing is needed. As the moon rose over the sanctuary, Promise sat in his favorite spot, surrounded by the lives he had helped transform. Maya slept peacefully nearby, her hand resting on Luna's fur. Atlas stood guard with the quiet confidence of one who had found new purpose. The elephant's gentle rumbles of contentment mixed with the soft sounds of other animals at rest. The documentary crew's director, packing up their equipment for the day, summed up what they had witnessed. "We came here expecting to film a story about a supernatural puppy. Instead, we found something far more extraordinary. Proof that love, when given completely and without condition, has the power to heal not just one heart, but to create an endless chain of healing that touches lives we can never see." Promise's tail thumped gently against the floor as he surveyed his extended family. In the moonlight, his shadow once again merged with Emily's, but now they weren't alone. Countless other shadows, of every life touched by their love, seemed to dance around them, creating a living testament to the power of a promise kept not just with dedication, but with the wisdom to let it grow beyond its original bounds. The sanctuary had become more than a place of healing. It was a living embodiment of Emily's understanding that love, in its purest form, knows no limits. Through Promise, her love had become a force that would continue to transform lives, long after the cameras stopped rolling and the world's attention moved on. For in the end, the greatest miracles aren't those that can be captured on film or explained in documentaries. They're the quiet moments when a heart opens to love. Again, when trust replaces fear, and when a promise kept becomes a legacy that lights the way for others to find their way home. Summer brought an unexpected challenge to the sanctuary. A devastating forest fire threatened the surrounding area, forcing evacuations of nearby homes. As smoke filled the horizon, Promise's behavior changed. He became unusually alert, his eyes fixed on the distant orange glow with an intensity that reminded Sarah of Emily's last journal entry about his warnings. Sarah found him in Emily's room, pouring gently at a previously undiscovered panel beneath the window seat. Inside lay another letter from Emily, this one different from the others. "If you're reading this," it began, "it means Promise has sensed danger. Trust him. He always knows." Within hours, Promise's instincts proved prophetic. The winds shifted suddenly, sending the fire racing toward town faster than predicted. But Promise was already in motion, organizing an evacuation that would become legendary in the sanctuary's history. He worked with Atlas to create a calm, orderly system for moving the animals. Luna, despite her blindness, helped guide smaller animals using her acute hearing to navigate through the thickening smoke. Hope maintained order among the more anxious residents. His own past trauma transformed into a steady presence that kept panic at bay. The elephant, whom they'd named Grace, proved invaluable, using her trunk to carry crates of smaller animals and helping to clear paths through fallen debris. The sight of her following Promise's lead, moving with deliberate care despite her own fear, inspired the entire community. Maya, who hadn't left the sanctuary since finding her voice there, helped Emma coordinate with emergency services. "Promise taught us that being brave isn't about not being scared," she told reporters who had gathered to cover the evacuation. "It's about helping others even when you're scared." As flames approached the sanctuary's borders, Promise led them to an underground shelter that had been part of the original Morrison house, a space that even Sarah hadn't known existed. Emily's father had built it as a tornado shelter, but today it would serve a different purpose. Inside, they found emergency supplies and another note from Emily. "Sometimes, the safest place isn't where you run from, but what you run toward. Promise will show you the way." The documentary crew, who had stayed to help, captured extraordinary footage of Promise organizing the animals in the shelter. Each species found its place, guided by the transformed souls who had learned his methods of peace and trust. Predator and prey alike settled into a calm coexistence, united by the greater threat outside. James and Atlas worked tirelessly alongside. Local firefighters, their military training proving invaluable in the crisis. The Belgian Malinois, once traumatized by explosions, now faced the roaring flames with steady courage, helping to guide other rescue teams through the smoke. Dr. Hayes arrived with a team of veterinary students who had been studying Promise's methods. They watched in amazement as the sanctuary's residents demonstrated crisis response behaviors that went beyond conventional animal psychology. "This isn't just learned behavior," Dr. Hayes observed, as Promise moved from group to group, offering comfort and maintaining order. "This is the evolution of empathy itself. Every animal here has not only healed, but learned to become a healer." The elephant, Grace, used her bulk to shield smaller animals from the heat radiating through the shelter walls. Luna's calm presence helped soothe anxious newcomers, while Hope organized playgroups to distract the younger animals from their fear. Sarah found Promise by Emily's preserved room, which they had managed to protect from the smoke. He sat before the photos, his expression holding a wisdom that seemed to transcend time itself. In that moment, she understood this crisis wasn't just a test of their emergency procedures. It was a demonstration of how far they'd come. The sanctuary had evolved from a place of individual healing to a community capable of facing any challenge together. Each animal's past trauma had been transformed into a unique strength that now contributed to their collective survival. As night fell and the fire raged closer, Promise led them in what Emma called their circle of strength. The animals gathered in concentric rings, with the strongest and most stable forming an outer barrier of calm. The documentary crew's infrared cameras captured the extraordinary scene, body temperatures lowering across the group as they found peace in their unity. Maya, who had once been too traumatized to speak, now moved confidently among the animals, singing softly, a sound that rippled through the shelter, creating waves of tranquility. Her voice, joined by Emma's, carried Emily's favorite lullaby, creating a bridge between past and present. The fire tested their resolve through the night, but Promise's preparations held firm. When dawn finally broke and the danger passed, they emerged to find the sanctuary standing, scorched but intact. The firebreak Emily's father had built years ago, combined with the efforts of firefighters and the community, had saved their haven of healing. But the real miracle wasn't the building's survival. It was the transformation they witnessed in the aftermath. Animals who had arrived broken and afraid now helped clear debris and rebuild. The elephant used her strength to move fallen trees, while the other residents worked together to restore their home. The documentary crew's footage of the crisis became something else entirely, a testament to the power of transformed hearts to face any challenge. Promise's methods had created not just a sanctuary, but a living example of how healing, once achieved, becomes a force that can protect and restore others. Dr. Morrison, reviewing the footage, identified patterns that would revolutionize crisis response in animal care facilities worldwide. Promise didn't just teach them to cope with trauma, he explained. He taught them to transcend it, to turn their wounds into wisdom that could light the way for others. As the community worked to restore the sanctuary, Promise led them in creating a new memorial garden. Here, they planted trees for every animal who had found healing within these walls, creating a living testament to the power of resilience. Emma, helping to design the garden, understood its deeper meaning. "Each tree is like a promise," she said, watching Promise guide Maya in planting a sapling. "They'll grow into something beautiful, just like the love that saved us all." The fire had threatened to destroy their haven, but instead it had revealed the true strength of Promise's legacy. In facing crisis together, they had discovered that healing isn't just about recovering from past wounds. It's about building something stronger, something that can weather any storm. As life at the sanctuary returned to normal, Promise's ageless wisdom seemed more profound than ever. He had shown them that the greatest protection against life's fires comes not from walls or shelters, but from hearts that have learned to beat in harmony with others. The documentary crew, packing up their equipment one final time, had captured something far more powerful than they'd anticipated. A living proof that love, when nurtured and shared, becomes an unbreakable shield against whatever darkness life may bring. As autumn painted the sanctuary grounds in vibrant hues once again, Promise's legacy faced its most profound test. A mysterious illness had begun affecting animals in shelters across the country, causing many to close their doors. But Promise, always one step ahead, had already begun preparing the sanctuary for its most important mission yet. The morning brought an urgent call from Dr. Hayes. "We're seeing unprecedented numbers of animals being abandoned as shelters shut down," she reported, her voice heavy with concern. The sanctuary might be their last hope. Promise, listening intently to the conversation, immediately went into action. He gathered his core team, Atlas, Luna, Hope, and Grace the elephant, leading them in preparations for what would become their greatest challenge. Sarah watched in amazement as Promise organized the sanctuary's residents into specialized care units. Animals who had once been patients were now becoming healers themselves, each using their unique experiences to help others. The transformation was extraordinary, proof that healing, when complete, naturally flows outward to touch other lives. Maya, who had become an integral part of the sanctuary's operations, noticed something remarkable. Promise is teaching them to be like him, she observed, watching as recovered animals demonstrated remarkable empathy and understanding toward newcomers. He's showing them how to turn their own stories into strength for others. The first wave of evacuees arrived. That afternoon, dozens of animals from shelters forced to close. Among them was a young wolf-dog hybrid named Shadow, whose story touched them all. Born in captivity, but too wild for traditional adoption, he had bounced between facilities until the crisis left him with nowhere to go. Promise approached Shadow with a wisdom that seemed to transcend species barriers. The hybrid, initially defensive and afraid, found himself responding to Promise's calm presence. It was as if Promise understood something about being caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, but finding purpose in that unique position. Dr. Morrison, who had returned to document this unprecedented situation, observed Promise's methods with growing amazement. He's not just helping them adjust, he noted. He's creating a new model of community where differences become strengths rather than barriers. The documentary about Promise's work had aired internationally, drawing attention from unexpected quarters. A renowned Buddhist monastery in Tibet reached out, recognizing in Promise's methods ancient wisdom about the interconnectedness of all beings. They sent 2 monks to observe and learn, believing that Promise's approach to healing contained universal truths about compassion and understanding. Emma, working alongside the monks, found herself understanding Promise's teachings in new ways. It's like he knows that every hurt carries its own medicine, she explained to Maya as they watched Promise guide Shadow through his first interaction with other residents. If you learn to listen to your heart's wisdom, your worst experiences can become your greatest gifts to others. The sanctuary's new memorial garden, planted after the fire, had begun to flourish. Each tree, representing a healed soul, created a living testimony to the power of transformation. Promise often led newcomers there, as if showing them a map of possibility, from wounded to healer, from lost to guide. One evening, as the autumn sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, something extraordinary happened. Shadow, who had been watching Promise's methods carefully, independently approached a newly arrived fox kit who was too terrified to leave its transport cage. Using Promise's gentle techniques, the wolf-dog hybrid created a safe space that allowed the kit to find its courage. Sarah, witnessing this moment, understood that Promise's legacy was evolving into something even more remarkable than they had imagined. He wasn't just healing animals. He was teaching them to become healers themselves, creating a self-sustaining cycle of compassion that could continue long after him. The Buddhist monks, observing this transformation, spoke of ancient prophecies, about beings who could bridge the gaps between worlds, teaching lessons of universal love and understanding. Promise, they believed, was demonstrating truths their traditions had long held, that the purest form of healing comes from turning one's own wounds into wisdom that can light the way for others. As the crisis deepened nationwide, the sanctuary became a beacon of hope. Promise's methods, now being taught by those he had healed, proved remarkably effective at helping traumatized animals adjust to sudden change. The documentary crew returned, capturing this new chapter in the sanctuary's evolution. Atlas, working with military precision, organized the expanding facility into zones that catered to different needs. Luna used her heightened other senses to identify animals in emotional distress before their anxiety could escalate. Hope demonstrated how trust could be rebuilt even after the deepest betrayals. And Grace, the elephant, provided a steady, maternal presence that calmed even the most agitated newcomers. But it was Shadow who surprised them all. The wolf-dog hybrid, once considered too wild for rehabilitation, became Promise's most dedicated student. He seemed to understand intuitively that his unique nature, neither fully wild nor fully domestic, gave him special insight into helping others find their place in the world. The sanctuary's success in handling the crisis attracted attention from wildlife preserves and conservation centers worldwide. Promise's methods were proving effective not just with domestic animals, but with wild species struggling to adapt to changing environments. His approach to healing transcended the usual boundaries between wild and tame, showing that at the heart of all beings was a capacity for connection and understanding. Maya, who had found her voice through Promise's gentle guidance, began writing about their experiences. Her observations, simple but profound, captured the essence of what made the sanctuary unique. Promise shows us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a way of seeing. When you look at someone through eyes of love, you see past their wounds, to their true nature, and when they feel truly seen, they begin to heal. As winter approached, bringing new challenges, Promise continued to evolve his methods. He worked with Dr. Hayes to develop protocols that could be shared with other facilities, ensuring that his approach to healing could spread beyond the sanctuary's walls. But more importantly, he was creating a living legacy, a community of healed healers who could carry his work forward. One crisp evening, as the sanctuary settled into its nightly routine, Sarah found Promise in Emily's room. He sat before the wall of memories, now expanded to include countless stories of transformation and hope. In the fading light, his shadow once again merged with Emily's, but now it seemed to encompass all the lives they had touched, a great tapestry of healing that stretched far beyond the sanctuary's bounds. Emma, joining them quietly, understood what they were witnessing. Emily's love was like a seed, she whispered. Promise planted it in every heart he healed, and now it's growing into a forest of love that will keep growing forever. The sanctuary had become more than a haven for healing. It was a living testament to the power of love to transform wounds into wisdom, fear into courage, and isolation into connection. Through Promise, Emily's simple act of love had evolved into a force that would continue touching lives long after the last page of their story was written. As night fell and stars appeared above the sanctuary, Promise led his extended family in their evening ritual. But now, instead of just receiving comfort, each animal offered it to others in their own unique way. The circle of healing had become complete, Promise's legacy assured not through endless time, but through the countless hearts he had taught to love as purely and completely as he did. Winter settled over the sanctuary like a gentle blanket, bringing with it a sense of profound change. Promise, whose ageless presence had guided so many to healing, began spending longer hours in Emily's room, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. The entire sanctuary seemed to hold its breath, understanding that a significant moment approached. One snowy morning, Sarah discovered a hidden compartment in Emily's desk, one that Promise had deliberately led her to find. Inside lay a final letter dated the morning of the accident, along with a small wooden box. The letter, written in Emily's careful hand, spoke of dreams and visions she'd had about Promise's future. "He showed me something amazing," Emily had written. "A time when his love would grow so big it wouldn't need his physical form anymore. Don't be sad when that time comes. It means his promise has been fulfilled in the most beautiful way possible." As Sarah read these words, Promise sat beside her, his eyes carrying a profound peace she'd never seen before. Outside, the sanctuary hummed with the life he had helped create. Shadow teaching new arrivals the art of finding strength in their unique natures, Luna guiding those who felt lost, Atlas maintaining the safe haven they'd built together. The bar. Buddhist monks, who had remained to study Promise's methods, recognized the signs first. "He has completed his dharma," they explained gently. "His teaching is now alive in every heart he has touched. The vessel is no longer needed when the essence has been fully shared." The transformation began subtly. Promise's physical form remained unchanged, but his energy seemed to expand, touching every corner of the sanctuary. Animals who had learned from him began exhibiting an even deeper understanding of his methods, as if receiving a final, profound lesson in healing. Maya, whose intuition had grown remarkably sensitive, gathered the sanctuary's residents in the memorial garden. Without being told, they formed the circular pattern Promise had taught them. But this time, something was different. Each animal seemed to glow with an inner light, carrying a piece of his wisdom. Emma opened Emily's wooden box, finding it filled with small, heart-shaped tags identical to Promise's. A note explained, "These are for the ones who will carry his love forward. Each one is made from the same metal as Promise's tag, melted down from my grandmother's wedding ring. She always said true love never ends, it just changes form." As the winter sun reached its zenith, Promise led them in one final lesson. He moved through the gathered creatures, touching each one briefly, seemingly transferring something of his essence. The documentary crew's cameras captured an extraordinary sight, each animal's eyes beginning to hold the same ageless wisdom that had always characterized Promise's gaze. Dr. Hayes, witnessing this phenomenon, understood they were seeing the culmination of Promise's work. "He's not leaving," she explained to the tearful observers. "He's multiplying. Every life he touched becomes a carrier of his gift." Shadow, the wolf-dog hybrid who had learned to bridge worlds, was the first to demonstrate this truth. As a newly arrived injured deer trembled in fear, Shadow approached with Promise's exact gentle presence, his eyes holding the same deep understanding that had helped so many find healing. The sanctuary's residents, one by one, began showing signs of Promise's influence in deeper ways. Luna's ability to guide others through darkness evolved into an almost supernatural empathy. Atlas's protective nature blossomed into a profound understanding of emotional wounds. Hope's journey from trauma to healing became a living template for transformation. Grace, the elephant, demonstrated perhaps the most remarkable change. Her presence began to carry the same ageless quality that had marked Promises, her eyes holding wisdom that seemed to span lifetimes. She became a living link between Promise's legacy and the sanctuary's future. As evening approached, Promise led them one last time to Emily's room. The space had evolved from a shrine to memory into a portal of transformation, where countless lives had discovered their capacity for healing. He sat in his favorite spot by the window, his form beginning to shimmer in the winter light. Maya, who had found her voice through Promise's love, began to sing Emily's lullaby. Other voices joined, human and animal, creating a harmony that seemed to bridge worlds. The Buddhist monks added their deep chanting, and the vibrations filled the sanctuary with unprecedented peace. Sarah found herself understanding what Emily had known all along, that Promise's physical form had never been the true miracle. The miracle was his ability to awaken the capacity for extraordinary love in others, creating a legacy that would continue growing long after his visible presence faded. The transformation completed as the first stars appeared. Promise's form seemed to dissolve into pure light, but instead of disappearing, it multiplied, touching each being present with a final gift, the full measure of his healing wisdom. His heart-shaped tag, which had never tarnished or aged, separated into countless tiny lights that settled on each animal before reforming as new tags around their necks. The documentary crew's cameras captured the extraordinary moment, though. No technology could fully record the profound shift that occurred in every heart present. Promise hadn't departed. He had evolved into something greater, his love now living through every life he had touched. In the days that followed, the Ait sanctuary demonstrated the truth of this transformation. Each resident carried a piece of Promise's gift, creating a living network of healing that proved more powerful than any single presence could be. New arrivals found themselves surrounded by countless expressions of the same love that had first transformed this place. The memorial garden bloomed out of season, each tree seeming to glow with inner light. Emily's room remained a sacred space, but now it pulsed with living energy rather than just memories. The photographs on the walls seemed to change subtly, capturing not just past moments, but the ongoing story of love's evolution. Dr. Morrison's final report described the sanctuary as a living organism of healing, where every member carries the capacity to transform trauma into triumph. The Buddhist monks spoke of it as a fulfilled prophecy, proof that love, in its purest form, can transcend all boundaries of form and time. Emma, placing the last of Emily's heart-shaped tags around Maya's neck, understood the deepest truth. "Promise didn't leave us," she said, watching the sanctuary's residents demonstrate their newfound wisdom. "He multiplied himself through every heart he healed. Now his love can reach everywhere it's needed." The sanctuary had become more than a place of healing. It was a living testament to the truth that love, when given completely and without condition, never truly ends. It simply evolves, finding new forms through which to touch the world with its transformative power. As winter stars wheeled overhead, the sanctuary pulsed with Promise's legacy, not as a memory, but as a living force that would continue growing, healing, and transforming lives for generations to come. Each resident had become a keeper of his promise, ensuring that pure love would always have a way to reach those who needed it most. Spring returned to the sanctuary, bringing with it the first anniversary of Promise's transformation. The grounds had flourished beyond anyone's imagination, becoming a living testament to the power of love to evolve and multiply. The documentary that had captured Promise's story had touched millions worldwide, inspiring a movement of similar sanctuaries across continents. Sarah stood in Emily's room, now transformed into what visitors called the Heart of Healing. The walls, still adorned with Emily's photographs, had gained an ethereal quality. Each image seemed to pulse with living energy, telling not just the story of a girl and her puppy, but of love's infinite capacity to transform and renew itself. Maya, who had become the sanctuary's lead youth counselor, was explaining Promise's legacy to a group of children who had traveled from across the country to experience the sanctuary's unique healing environment. "Love doesn't disappear," she told them, touching her heart-shaped tag. "It just finds new ways to grow." The sanctuary's residents demonstrated this truth daily. Shadow, once considered too wild for rehabilitation, now led specialized programs for animals caught between domestic and wild worlds. His unique perspective had revolutionized approaches to wildlife rehabilitation globally, proving that perceived limitations could become extraordinary strengths. Luna, whose blindness had enhanced her other senses, had developed an uncanny ability to detect emotional trauma in others. She worked closely with Dr. Hayes in pioneering new methods of identifying and treating psychological wounds in animals. Their research was changing the field of veterinary medicine, introducing concepts of emotional healing that had never been considered before. Atlas, the former military dog, had become a bridge between human and animal trauma recovery. Working with James, he helped establish programs specifically designed for veterans and their service animals, showing how shared trauma could become a foundation for mutual healing. Grace, the elephant, had perhaps undergone the most remarkable transformation. Her presence carried an almost mystical quality, drawing people and animals in crisis to her with an inexplicable magnetic force. The Buddhist monks, who had established a permanent meditation center at the sanctuary, spoke of her as a living embodiment of compassionate wisdom. Emma, now a teenager, had developed her own unique gift for understanding and translating the sanctuary's special energy. Promise showed us that healing isn't just about getting better, she explained to visitors. It's about discovering that your wounds can become windows of understanding for others. The memorial garden had grown into a sacred grove, each tree marking a life transformed, becoming a living channel for Promise's legacy. The heart-shaped tags that Emily had left, now worn by every permanent resident, seemed to catch and reflect light in impossible ways, creating patterns that danced across the sanctuary walls like living memories. Dr. Morrison's research team had documented thousands of cases of extraordinary healing at the sanctuary, many defying conventional medical understanding. "What we're seeing here," he reported to the National Veterinary Association, "isn't just psychological or physical healing. It's the evolution of consciousness itself, proving that love can transcend the boundaries we thought were fixed." Catherine. Walsh's foundation had expanded its support, establishing a network of promise-inspired sanctuaries across the globe. Each location adapted his methods to their unique cultural context, but all shared the core understanding that had made the original sanctuary so powerful: that love, when given purely and without condition, has the power to transform any. Wound into wisdom, The Buddhist monks had integrated Promise's teachings into their ancient practices, creating a new form of meditation that helped practitioners access the same pure, loving awareness that had made his healing so effective. They spoke of him not as a departed being, but as an awakened presence that had shown how to access universal love in its most practical form. 1 year after Promise's visible presence had multiplied into countless expressions of healing, the sanctuary received its most challenging case yet. A young lion, rescued from a cruel circus environment, arrived with wounds both physical and psychological so severe that even experienced healers felt overwhelmed. But the sanctuary's residents, each carrying a piece of Promise's wisdom, responded with extraordinary coordination. Shadow demonstrated how to find strength in perceived differences. Luna shared her gift for navigating unseen obstacles. Atlas showed how to transform fear into protective power, and Grace created a space of such profound peace that the lion's defenses began to dissolve. The transformation that followed proved that Promise's legacy had grown even stronger than his physical presence had been. The lion's healing became a symphony of collaborative care, with each resident contributing their unique expression of the love that had transformed them. Maya captured the moment in the sanctuary's journal. Today, we saw Promise's love dancing through every heart he touched, proving that pure love doesn't need a single form to change the world. It just needs willing hearts to carry it forward. The documentary crew, returning to capture the sanctuary's evolution, found something far more profound than they had expected. Instead of a place marking the memory of an extraordinary being, they discovered a living laboratory of love's endless capacity to reinvent itself. As spring flowers bloomed around Emily's preserved room, Sarah found one final gift, a diary entry Emily had written the morning of the accident. Promise showed me something amazing in my dreams last night. He showed me that love is like a seed that keeps sprouting new seeds. Even if the first plant goes away, its love keeps growing in all the new plants. I think that's what forever really means. The sanctuary had become living proof of Emily's insight. Promise's love hadn't ended or even simply endured. It had evolved, finding new expressions through every life it touched. Each resident had become not just a recipient of healing, but a unique channel through which that healing could reach others. As the sun set on the anniversary of Promise's transformation, the sanctuary glowed with an inner light that visitors said reminded them of his presence. But it wasn't just memory they were sensing. It was the living reality of love's greatest truth, that when given completely and without condition, love doesn't diminish or die. It multiplies, evolves, and finds new ways to touch the world with its transformative power. The heart-shaped tags caught the last rays of sunlight, creating a constellation of tiny stars that danced across the sanctuary walls. In that moment, everyone present understood that Promise's story hadn't ended. It had merely opened a new chapter in the endless book of love's capacity to heal, transform, and renew itself through every willing heart. The sanctuary would continue growing, evolving, and touching lives in ways that transcended ordinary understanding. For in the end, Promise had shown them all that the purest form of love isn't bound by time or form. It's a living force that finds new ways to express itself through every heart brave enough to carry it forward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them. out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.